To offer some perspective, Republican Senator Rob Portman of Ohio. He sits on several key committees, including Foreign Relations. Senator, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Hey, Kate. Good to have you back on.
Thank you. When it comes to sanctions, who do you believe, the UN ambassador or the White House here?
Well, it sounds like they've got an internal discussion still to be had. But look, sanctions have been effective, and I think there need to be additional sanctions, not just for what's happening in Syria, but also what's happening. I just got back from Ukraine, the eastern border of Ukraine, and the disinformation campaigns that continue throughout Eastern and Central Europe. And so I do think sanctions are effective and can be more effective in the future.
Why the hesitation then from the White House? I mean, Nikki Haley isn't one to speak out of turn, especially when she knows what she's doing on the Sunday talk shows. I mean, what do you think happened there?
You know, I can't speculate except to say that it is a decision that includes, some larger geopolitical stuff going on in the region, I imagine. My understanding from the sanctions that she discussed that might be in place is that they would be specific to Syria. In other words, stopping some of the Russians' arms sales and some of that activity. And again, some of our sanctions in the past have been effective in that, Kate, because there have been arms sales that were meant to move forward that were stopped because of countries being concerned about the sanctions we were putting in place. So I think it can be very effective, and I hope they'll move forward with it.
Well, we'll stand by on that one and see where that turns next. But one critical part that's missing when it comes to Syria, well, and many other things, is the Secretary of State. Should the full Senate vote on Mike Pompeo, even if your committee votes against him?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's important we have a Secretary of State in place. I've talked to some of my Democratic colleagues on the committee. We had a hearing last week, as you know. I thought Pompeo did a good job. Some are concerned about, the broader position that the administration is taking on some foreign policy issues. I get that, but we need a Secretary of State in place, and Pompeo, having been director of CIA, is very well aware of the hot button issues around the world, including obviously what's going on in Syria, North Korea, and Iran. So I think he's a good pick, and I hope we have the chance to vote for him on the floor and to get him in place. We need him now. By the way, he's going to help in terms of getting the career Foreign Service people morale up, because that's one of the issues we have right now, is we need to have a stronger State Department. Soft power and diplomacy is needed. I think he'll be good at that.
But Senator, you would not be happy if a Democratic majority circumvented essentially your committee and said, even if that he doesn't pass the vote in Foreign Relations and takes it straight to the floor, you wouldn't be happy with that. Why is it okay now?
Well, I don't think I would object as long as there was a vote on the floor and people could, vote their conscience, yes or no. We've done this in the past where there's been a tie vote, I know. I imagine there's some precedent even for when there's a negative vote. I suspect in committee, from counting the heads as I have it, maybe a tie vote, by the way. And my point is that we just need to have a Secretary of State in place, and he's got the experience and background to be able to hit the ground running, and he's needed. And the State Department morale will be improved if he's in place, in my view.
Senator, the former director of the FBI is out with his new book today. I'm not sure if you're aware of that with everything that's going on. The president called the president, James Comey, called the president morally unfit to be president. Trump responded saying that Comey should be prosecuted. Comey today then says that the president is calling for the imprisonment of a private citizen and that that's not acceptable in this country. Who are you with here?
Well, I hope that FBI directors, and for that matter, those of us in public service in general, can get up above the fray. I know that also in the book, apparently, I haven't read the book, but apparently he also talks about the president's color of his skin being orange or something like that, and the size of his hands and the length of his tie. I mean, I just think this is, we're sort of falling into this, I don't know, tabloid type back and forth stuff that I think has no place in public service. So I'm not big on kiss and tell books in general, Kate. Particularly for someone who's a law enforcement official, I think we ought to be above the partisanship and above the name calling.
You think you shouldn't have written it at all?
Well, look, I haven't read it, so I can't judge it. From what I'm hearing from the reporting, it sounds like this is something that is beneath the dignity of somebody who has the career and the reputation that Jim Comey has, and he ought to, I think, be focusing on, in his post-FBI period, staying above the fray and not getting involved in the name calling and the back and forth that you're talking about today.
Well, Senator, let me ask you, on the Russia investigation, Senator Tillis, Republican, of course, pushing a bill to protect the special counsel from being fired if the president would go that route. And he also said this to Politico, and I'll read this to you. The same people who would criticize me for filing this bill would be absolutely angry if I wasn't pounding the table for this bill if we were dealing with Hillary Clinton. So spare me your righteous indignation. He's talking to Republicans here. Are you with him?
Well, I'm not one of those people who has criticized him, and I do, by the way, believe that it would be a big mistake for the president to fire Mueller, and for that matter to fire Rosenstein, who would then fire Mueller.
A mistake with what kind of ramifications? What would you do if he did?
Well, first of all, we got to let Mueller finish his investigation, follow the facts where they lead. I do think Mueller is above the fray, by the way, per my earlier conversation about, importance of public servants staying above the fray. But the president has a constitutional right to be able to hire and fire people who work for him. And I think as my lawyers have looked at the legislation you're talking about, the Tillis legislation, they believe that it is not consistent with that constitutional right. It doesn't mean that the president should do it. He should not. But I don't think that there's an easy way for Congress as the legislative branch to step in between a president and an executive branch employee. I've worked at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. I've been on the executive side and the legislative side. And our founders did not intend for Congress to be able to intervene in terms of the hiring and firing of executive officials. So I think that's the issue with the legislation. However, I do think that Congress ought to speak, as I have spoken clearly over time about this, saying that we ought to let the Mueller investigation proceed. We ought to let him get to the bottom of this issue. The American people want to know, particularly to avoid the Russians and others meddling in our next election. We need to know what happened, why it happened, how it can be avoided going forward.
And real quick, since it is tax day, of course, you were in Ohio talking about the Republican tax cut yesterday. And that is the message that, of course, Republicans do want to be running on and would be a beneficial message for them to be running on in 2018. What do you really think, though? Do you really think that it's going to break through when it comes to voters and everything else that we've just talked about? The president, he's got his personal attorney facing federal investigation. He spends much more of his time tweeting about James Comey, the Russia investigation, and a lot of other things than focused on the tax legislation that you all passed.
Well, look, I wish, all of Washington was more focused on these substantive issues because they really matter. The people I represent, 90% of them have been told by the IRS, we're going to withhold less of your paycheck because of this tax cut and tax reform bill, and they love that, and they acknowledge it, and the proof's in the paycheck. Businesses all over Ohio are telling me this helps us to be able to help our employees and help to make them more productive by expanding more equipment, more technology. Yesterday I was at Kroger, as you noted, and they had a series of announcements, including an exciting new continuing education program where people get $3,500 a year to go get a GED or to get an MBA. They're also putting more in the 401k. I'm seeing that all over the country where businesses, small and large, are responding in a positive way. So I do think that's important to talk about, not because it's about politics, because it's about substance. I think healthcare costs are too high. I think we need to do more in terms of dealing with these international crises that we're talking about by having, a better plan and a better strategy. Those are the things that I would hope we'd be talking about.
Well, and your hope springs eternal, Senator. Let's see what happens. Great to see you.
Thank you for talking about some of those issues today, and welcome back.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Take care.
Coming up for us.